everybody, welcome back to another FAB Foundations video. This time we're going to be diving into one of maybe the most important topics of the game, attacking and defending. And we say it like that on purpose.
Like, a lot of people assume it's two topics, right?
It's a merge. Yeah. There is no attacking without defending. There's no defending without attacking. It's a singular consideration that you're making throughout the entire game. And I think that realization for me was one of those stepping points where I'm like, oh, I'm seeing the game on a new level now, right?
I think it's a couple months back I was teaching some new people, and I think this is an early revelation. It's very simple if you've been playing the game for a while, and you can almost take it for granted. Mm-hmm. But it's that simple concept in this game that is, the more I block, the less I attack with, right? The more I cover up damage, the less powerful my turns are going to be.
Generally, yes.
Yes.
Now, because sometimes you find those hands, and it's like, if my opponent doesn't attack me, I can only use 2 cards out of this hand.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. And that's a deck building consideration we talk about a lot, is like, do you have a deck that can, when it has the window of those 4 cards, bring the heat or not?
Sure, and some decks don't. And I think that can be a difficult thing to grasp, because not only do you have to be able to evaluate what is the maximum potential of my hand, you then have to be able to understand how much am I reducing that potential by blocking with certain cards. Sometimes you block with 2 cards and your damage potential is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Sometimes you block with 2 cards and you go from doing 15 damage in one turn to 4.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that you have to understand to make that evaluation. So I would love to look at this hand of cards.
Let's work through it.
And have you tell me how to maximize this hand.
Let's work through it. So we're looking at attacking and defending. This is building off of that foundational understanding that every card is worth about 3. And so we're actually going to get some Arya cards here and look at what exactly is going on. So let's go to the table here and take a look, right? So the first thing you do, when you look at a hand in Flesh and Blood, is I need to figure out what's the best version of this hand, right? Like, in a vacuum, let's just say Zach doesn't attack me at all, or maybe this is my first hand. And it's like, well, what's the best thing that I can do with this? So we've got a couple of new mechanics in Arya, like the Fuse mechanic. You can see Entwine Lightning here has Lightning Fusion, and that kind of changes the math of some of this, where a card is now worth a little bit more than just what it's doing. It's also worth if it's fusible or not. Like, can you fuse with the card or not?
Some other benefit.
So we've got Entwine Lightning here, but we don't have any lightning cards in this hand, so we're just going to ignore that for now.
One thing I'll note about this hand, I just noticed, there's a Guardian and a Runeblade card.
Yeah, well,
so that would probably be a good first step.
That just makes it more interesting.
A generic blue card that blocks.
How about an Onyx Touch?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's the perfect
card.
The most generic card. So that's the first thing you want to do foundationally is make sure your deck's
legal. Yeah. I appreciate that.
Now, there is like a shapeshifter format apparently been running at some of these calling events that you could do that.
They said it was really fun, too.
Yeah, that's what I heard from everyone. So no one played it ever. I'm just kidding.
So if I'm looking at this hand, right, so the first thing I'm looking at is I've got this blue. I've got 2 attacks for 3, and then I've got an attack for 0. So I know that this is a 0 for 4, so that's higher than 3.
1 card is worth 4.
1 card's that's higher than 3, so I'm immediately kind of attracted to what is this going to be able to do. So I'm also looking at my defense values here. So if this is swinging for 4, these 2 cards block for 3, and then this card blocks for 2. We essentially even out, right? So we do 4 damage, we block 2 damage, that's 6. We block 3 here, that's 6. So we've hit our average of 3 per card, right? So we want to find out, can we get more out of this hand? So then we're like, okay, well, the other things we can do is we can go like, let's pitch this 3 and attack for 7. So this attack is greater than 3 per card, right?
Yeah, because it's 2 cards for 7, which is 3.5 per card.
3.5. Hey, we've got some advantage there. Then we block for 3. And then if we also have to block with this card, we're kind of back in the same situation, right?
Up total
like 5 plus 7 is still 12.
Yep.
But then we have another option here, which is then if we could just block for 3 and arsenal this guy for next turn.
That's a future 4.
Now we get a future 4, a current 3.5, plus a little 3, so that'll drag the hand down by like 3.28 or whatever it is.
But that ends up being 7 plus 3 is 10, plus 4 is 14.
So we can find 14 here.
You're getting 14 value out of this single hand, which is better than 4 earlier.
Now, if we run into a lightning card and we can give this go again out of the arsenal, it gets so good. Here's another option, right? So then other options are like,
Isn't it amazing how many options there are with the 4 cards?
The game is genius. It drives me crazy. We just got back from the calling in Dallas, and I just want to play 24/7. I cannot get my mind off of it.
It's a shame there's not other big events.
And and I'm thinking about the games that I lost, and I'm like, oh man, I think if I had approached that game differently, I could have won. So anyway, it goes deep. So here's another thing. We've got Entangle. So Entangle looks the same as Break Ground off the bat. But the thing about Entangle is it actually has an added benefit of this -2 on your opponent's first attack if you fuse it.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets interesting, right? So then it's like, well, this card, if we are just looking at kind of damage points, no consideration of the game state or anything like that, if I can fuse this card, this is a 3 for 7 +2 because I'm taking 2 away from my opponent. So that's a 3 for 9. Now, a 3 for 9, if correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a 4.5 damage per card.
That's right. Now, the cost of that, of course, is that, and you have the Earth card here to fuse with it.
Right.
So you can keep these 3 cards.
So let's just assume we have the 4.5 average here. That's great. So that's 9. Let's assume that we block with this. That gets me to 11. And let's assume that we just put this down in.
Because you get to fuse with it, and then you get to save it in Arsenal.
Yeah, and then let's assume we can play it next turn. This goes to a 3.5 on average, right? Because we already did that math. So then if we put this, and let's just assume this is like a 3.5 down here. So then we've got 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.5-ish.
Yeah, when the previous was 14.
So this is actually the better hand,
yeah.
right? But I think off the bat, a lot of us would look at it and say like, well, if we do arsenaling this is like, and probably from the game's perspective, depending on the curve of your deck, how many lightning cards you have, this might be the better arsenal. But it's at least worth noting that these 2 plays, like going to Entangle, fusing the Break Ground, and then putting in an Arsenal, is at least as good or maybe better than Entwine Lightning, sending off a Break Ground and blocking with the Entangle.
Well, and I think part of why it is better is you could do that. You could block here and get a similar situation going.
Similar numbers, right?
But the other part of that is like if you go with the fused Entangle as your attack, and then you Arsenal this is a card that just sticks around in your hand.
Yeah, right?
So there's actually a hidden cost of that, which is because you always get to fill your hand back up to 4.
Yes.
So you don't want to be sitting on a ton of cards that are just sitting there that could have been providing you some sort of value.
And I think that's one of the critical lessons just when you're considering attacking and defending. Running this attack math before you commit to defense cards means that you can at least get some value out of every card in your hand.
Yeah.
And in this kind of a game where you do draw back up, this is not like, a lot of these games that we played in the past, you hold on to cards through turns. So you can have contingency plans, you can build to combos that are greater than the sum of their parts and build to this big presence that you play everything out all at once. But in a game like Flesh and Blood, it is a turn-by-turn tempo push and pull between you and your opponent. So any card that I don't use on defense or offense that goes through a full cycle is worth 0. Right, it's worth 0. So if I'm looking at the value of this hand, like that play you just talked about, right?
Yeah.
Is I'm attacking for 7, I'm going to get 4 next turn, so let's just add that in. Hey, that's great. I'm at 11 there. This being 0 means that I got less than 3 out of that hand.
Technically saving it gives you the 2 off of Entangle.
Yeah, true.
Like that's why you would do that.
Absolutely,
right? Instead of blocking.
Yeah.
But the fact that it actually just takes up that slot in your hand, kind of to me is like a -3.
Yeah, it is a -3.
Right.
And then that's not nearly as good.
Yeah.
Right?
Now,
11.
This is what makes this game, among a million things. We're going to say that a lot during this series. I'll say this is the thing that makes it awesome because there's a lot of it. But so you're doing this math, right? I think
I'm doing this as you're attacking me.
Absolutely.
This is all having to get worked out as you are attacking me. And I'm deciding how to defend.
Part of you deciding to defend is understanding what value are you giving up in order to make that defense, right? So let's just walk through a basic example. This is a vacuum. We can see what I'm looking at it, and I think mathematically the hand is to block here, to swing, and this is no context given, right?
Right.
Don't know the help, don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Swing for 7, fuse it, and have this 7 to send back again, which you'll see why the 7 is so important in a minute. I think that is the maximum play.
Yeah.
Right?
Kind of in a vacuum that looks in the best,
vacuum,
right?
because you don't know what your opponent's doing, right?
Yeah.
But let's just take a very basic example. And let's say I played this red electrify. So the next time I have an attack that hits this turn, it's going to deal 3 damage to them.
Okay, so you've introduced a hit effect, and we know the game's about hit effects.
Yep.
Some wise person said it in the first video, so let's see what if that's true or not.
Who wasn't it? So I play Electrify, and then I play a red Heaven's Claws, right?
Interesting.
Okay, so I'm presented a 5 damage attack, and if this does any damage, you're also going to take an extra 3. So this is 8. Pretty good.
Presenting 8.
8 with 2 cards. I obviously had to pitch at least a yellow for this. So let's say I pitched this yellow Autumn's Touch. So I spent 3 cards, and I'm showing 8.
Yeah, and you're bringing 8. So interesting stuff here. So we've got a Heaven's Claws coming in for 5. It's actually coming in for 8. So we're going to turn off 3 value from your cards by adding an additional blocking card for us. So like one play that we're looking at here is like, okay, let's just assume our normal play works.
Yep.
We're going to hit the break ground. We're going to do all of that. We're going to block this for 2. This 2 block right here is blocking 2 damage, but it's also 3 extra damage that you're allowing through to me, right?
You're allowing 6 through.
So am I in a position where if 6 damage is coming through, if I can pull one of the cards into the block, is that better or worse than 6 damage, right? So like this play is a 3 for 7 with the -2 here and the Arsenal. So that's pretty good. So let's say 2 for the break ground entangle play. So let's say 2 in value that the break ground is contributing to that. And let's just value this at 3-ish in the Arsenal, because it's going to come back as a card that's doing 3 to 3.5 per card. So that totals to 5 in value right there, right? Now, if instead I decide to add this and do a 3 for 7 with no Arsenal card, we know that play was worth about 5. This play is actually worth 6.
Yeah, that one card is not just like hypothetically worth 6. In this case, it's 6
It's distinctly worth 6.
on the board damage.
Right.
6 points for that one card.
So if I block here, that's worth 6. This entangle is bringing in 6. If I switch it over here, break ground as a fuse and Arsenal card is bringing about 5 damage.
Yeah.
5 damage points or damage value. If
Now, you happen to be in a scenario where you put this card in and you can actually still swing for 7.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
But sometimes this is not that card.
Right,
This could be like a So Tomorrow, right? Or
let's do
insert
something like
anything.
let's do something like a glacial. Even,
Okay,
right?
yeah. So you're looking at this, and it's like, well,
That's actually easily just the entangle.
y-
You just play the entangle for 7. How about
Yeah, yeah.
let's do a surge?
yeah,
Show me that. Let's look at this.
sure. So this is a red Earth or Surge, right?
Yeah.
So now your choices get way tougher.
This is way harder, right?
It's so much harder.
So like you're thinking, okay, I can get 7 here, but by going here for 4, both of these cards are worth 2. This is worth 3.5 across this. So I'm looking at 4 plus 7. That's an 11 damage turn across both of those. That's less than 3 per card.
It's not good.
Absolutely hate that,
Yeah.
right? So then it's like, okay, well, what about if we go 3, 2 here? So now we've turned off your 3 in value, but we can do nothing with one of these cards except Arsenal.
Yeah.
So that's not very good. But we have a cheeky 0 cost attack here, right? So if I actually flop this 2 here, let's say we do it like this, I block all of that damage, I swing for 4 at Arsenal and Entangle.
Yep.
So now we're getting interesting. So let's say that this is a 3.5 because
Yep.
it's going to swing in for 7 off of 2 cards. Let's say this is a 4, so we're at 7.5. Then we've got the Earthler Surge that's blocking 2, so that's 7, 8, 9.5. Plus, let's just factor in the Electrify turnoff there.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of value right there.
Yep.
What we could also do here, though,
It just keeps going.
this is called overblocking, right? And it kind of feels bad, but it doesn't matter. You need to just not even think about it, right? It's just 2 cards out of hand.
How much are they worth? It's worth 8. You're still getting more than 3 out of that card.
So it's the same thing. Entwined Lightning goes here for 4. Earthor Surge goes to Arsenal. Now, how do we value a card like Earthor Surge? Now we get into some crazy stuff, right? So Earthor Surge is a 2 for 5.
Yeah.
Now, if you can pitch 1 card, get an Earthler Surge and a 1-cost attack, let's say, get my Shock Striker here.
Yep.
And it's yellow, so
yellow
this is
Shock
not
Striker.
quite as good. So if I pitch 1 blue card, hit an Earthler Surge into
So
a
later, this
Shock
is assuming
Striker.
you saved this in the arsenal, right?
So if my deck is like the kind of deck that can hit these 1-cost attacks pretty often,
Yeah.
then Earthor Surge plus Shock Striker, if it's a red Shock Striker, for instance, that's coming in for 10.
Yeah.
Right? So you pitch one card, it comes in for 10. That's higher than 3 per card.
And if every card on average blocks for 3, then you know on a future turn by saving that Earth Force Surge, you can block with 2 cards, save a blue and like a red Shock Striker, and swing back for 10.
And swing back for 10, a higher average value of cards.
So your opponent presents this turn, right? You can cover it up and still swing for 10 on that turn.
That's right.
Which that is how you create what we call the pivot.
The pivot.
Which will be a future topic.
That's right, the pivot.
But as an example, as we keep showing this hand, let's say something else happens. Instead of this Heaven's Claws, let's actually say I pitch a blue and play a yellow Autumn's Touch.
A yellow Autumn's Touch.
So now we're coming in for 6, and if it hits, plus 3.
Well, this is an interesting conversation then about breakpoints. It's almost like you intended to do this. I don't know what happened.
Who set this up?
So you'll hear these conversations about breakpoints on attacking and defending, right? And so you see a lot of 4 damage cards coming through. You see a lot of 7 damage, 8 damage cards being like lifted up as exemplars of value. So this is kind of why, right? Like if most cards are blocking for 3, then this block of 6 is going to take 2 cards out of my hand, and I'm still going to be able to send back this Entwine Lightning for 4 and Arsenal this Break Ground.
And cover up all 8 damage, right?
And I cover up 8 damage for 2 cards. That's just phenomenal. Actually, technically 9 damage off the plus 3.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's great. Now, what I can't do is if I have 3/2 blocks in hand, this now turns into a, like, let's just say this Entangle is in here. If I've got to block this with with 3 cards, I'm left with 1 card that a lot of times can't do anything but go to Arsenal, and then you get a full 4-card hand to just
with no
pump
pressure.
value as much as you
Now,
can.
even in that case, those cards are each worth 3.
That's right.
So that's not a horrible exchange.
That's not terrible.
And I put a high premium on saving health. So in that case, right, if you have to do it, but that's why you can't just look at maximizing your hand in a vacuum, because sometimes your opponent presents 9. And sometimes it gets even worse, right? Like as an example, if it was red Autumn's Touch.
This is the break point right here.
Yeah, so the 6 is a big break point, particularly in sealed. A lot of cards block for 2. But in constructed, 7 is the 7 plus 3, 4, 7, 10, 13. Those are all really important points. But as this is a 7, if it does any damage, it's now going to hit for an extra 3. So what does that do to your hand?
So this is where you've changed nothing in terms of card quantity. Like
I'm
you
using
put
2
the
cards,
same
right?
amount of cards on the table, but you've fundamentally shifted where the value is going to be for me. So like if this hits, it's worth 10. That's super bad for me, right? So going back to our original base hand, right? Let's just lay it out here. So we know that this combination of cards we're essentially valuing at Entangle plus Autumn's Touch is going to be worth 9 on the fuse. So let's just factor that in, that these cards are worth 4.5 each. So this is worth 9. And then we're going to factor this in at about a 3.5 because we think we can do a 2-card swing for 7 off of this.
Absolutely.
So that's 9, 10, 11, 12.5 right here. That's an incredibly good amount of value.
Out of 3 cards,
that's an incredibly
very
good amount
strong
of value. That's what you're trying to do when you're attacking and defending is great, dude.
Yeah.
So we've got 12.5. We can go to 14.5 here. Okay, easy. 14.5, and then you get all of your effects. So we could write that down in our head and say, okay, that's a 14.5 exchange.
Now, to get a 14.5, this is the real math. You're going to take 8. So really, that's worth 6.5.
That's right. That's a fair way to put it.
That's the attacking defending math, right? You have to subtract out what you're taking to get that exchange.
Yeah, so we'll try to you can factor these in different ways, and you're gonna have to figure out how your brain works on this. There's a lot of people that try to and they will factor it twice in different, and it's like, no, you can't do that.
And of course, like the actual decisions, these will be more complicated topics, but are based on so much information.
Yeah.
Cards left in deck, how much health is left,
How much health do they have? Can you threaten lethal? All these kinds of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there.
So this play, let's just say this play is worth 14.5. I'm happy to put it like that, right? So then let's say that now we're on this stupid break point. And it's just awful, right? So if we want to cover this whole thing up, like we're probably either going to be here or we're going to flip here. This is going to go to Arsenal. Or we're going to flip here and we're going to swing 4 back at you. Yeah. And there's a really good decision point on which one of these is better.
Yeah, because you can basically cover up for 8 and still swing something back at your opponent.
Yep.
Or you could save it for Arsenal.
And let's just look at what that actually is, right? So you're threatening 7 plus 3 is 10. Let's say these 3 cards block that 10. So I have gotten 10 damage out of these 3 cards.
Yep.
So we'll count this as 10 plus a 4 back at you. That's 14.
That's right.
So it looks really tantalizing. And again, health values matter and these kinds of things.
Et cetera, et cetera.
But if this is 14, but this is technically 14.5, then as much as it's anathema to your way of thinking that I should block this so I don't hit that electrify trigger, you actually do more work swinging back with an entangle and arsenaling a break ground.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of stuff that, I didn't see this for years. Year plus.
Year.
I didn't see this for years.
Scratch out the S.
And it's like you feel like you're making intuitively strong plays.
Yeah.
But then you look at your own hand and you're like, wait a minute. In a vacuum, if I just take this 10
Yep.
and I swing back for essentially 9, so 7 plus a -2 on their attack, and I get to arsenal this break ground that comes back in for 3.5 next turn.
And strategically, if they allow this to hit, they're going to be a little weaker. And you've got a really strong threat to come back after their weaker turn.
That's right.
And that's where you get into the strategy of the entire game. But the recognition for me, like a key, just simple example of when I would take the damage and just block for 2 and just take the hit. If I'm like 7 or 8 damage ahead on health,
Right.
I'm at 17, you're at 9, and I can swing back for this much damage.
Absolutely.
I know you're at some point, and a huge part of this is getting your opponent to that lethal, right? Because then they have to block or they die, and they can't just take the exchange anymore.
Then it's not their decision anymore, right?
And that's what kind of makes the attacking blocking math so interesting, because though I picture it kind of like a chain, no pun intended on the attack chain.
Right.
But basically, the equation, like I said, you could subtract, right? The amount you're taking. But you're doing the addition and subtraction at different times than your opponent. And the goal is to get their math to equal 0 at the end before yours does.
That's right, yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
the flow of that and understanding is what adds context to this. But even the basic idea that the entangle play is going to make their play weaker into the turn you're going to probably play the break ground is a really strong setup.
Yeah, it's a super good setup. And just the raw, and it's not that that's always the right thing to do. I think that's what we're talking about. There's so much context or else we're not playing a game, right? It's not that that's always the right thing to do, but I think there's a lot of advantage in actually looking at where the max value is in a hand and then making the decision in the context of what's actually going on in the game.
Yep.
Because a lot of the time, I swear to you, the vast majority of people who are playing this game right now are going to slide this in and think, I got rid of the electrify trigger, I'm going to swing back for 4. I had a pretty good turn.
Yeah.
And you did have a pretty good turn in that situation. But it actually wasn't the best turn in a vacuum. So being able to at least bring that level of thinking to the decision-making process of attacking and defending in Flesh and Blood is where you're going to start being able to question some of the plays that I'm traditionally intuitively making and then looking at it and saying, well, maybe I'm actually not making the strongest plays.
And I think a lot of people, and I did this early on, you're looking at how to maximize your hand, and then you just do that play every time.
Yeah.
And that's not always the right play. You can look at it and well, this gets me the most value, but I lose the game.
Yeah, that could happen, right? I could just not block here, and I was like, well, I would die if I do that, so I need a new plan, right?
You're on 10 health, you can't not block this, right? Or even just how you learn how bad to get in a position where they can threaten lethal is. So getting down to a certain threshold is actually far worse than an inefficient turn.
You need to really know what you're doing, to make that happen. And other considerations, just even here with these guys, is like an example of the context that we're talking about. This Entwined Lightning, let's say we block here. Now you have a choice whether to send this or save it and arsenal it, right? So if my opponent is on 1 health, this is crazy strong.
Send it.
Send it, right? Because you know that they're going to have to block with 2 cards from it.
And as you can tell here, you're moving any 2 cards, and how much weaker is the turn?
And the turn gets way weaker. And then if their turn gets way weaker because they're blocking with 2, maybe you can come in with 3 cards on the next turn, and that's start push and pull. Now, if it's 20-20, and this is the first turn of the game or something, I know that I can arsenal this, and then I can potentially compound value with this by giving it go again. So maybe I can swing for 4 and then the 7 with both on the same turn. And so I have doubled the efficiency plays there, where I have a 3.5 on top of a 4 per card. And so that actually turns the heat up on that turn proportionally higher. So Go Again can do that, and so sometimes it's right to save it and have a bigger explosion in one turn where they can't handle all of it. Sometimes it's better to launch the attack now to put them on the back foot because you know they have to block in certain ways. And this is why we play the game of Flesh and Blood.
Absolutely right.
Any closing things on this, Zach, for attacking and defending? I think, for me, the most important is it's not that this is a math equation that you can always just solve for. This is 14.5, this is 14. But it is the first consideration you should be making as to where should my hand want to be to start, and then how do I trim it and block to make the most value out of those two things in the context of the game.
I think that's absolutely correct. And it's one of the most reassuring pieces of the game. A lot of times early people just think it's about maximizing those hands. Mm-hmm. And you can do that. And I think that's a good place to start. But hopefully this helps show kind of just how deep this could possibly be. And there's a million topics to cover, which we will not necessarily, but that's a little hyperbole.
A million videos on the way. You heard it here.
Yeah, that's right. I committed to 1 million videos. Good luck. But there's just a lot to consider of when you're making these choices, which is what we'll continue covering. So hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hey, we'll be back with some more Fab Foundations videos, and a shout out to everybody who is at the Dallas Calling and even at Vegas at our Sealed Saturday events. It's just great. This has been such a great community to be a part of so far. Really, just splendid. So thanks to everybody for shouting us out when you were there, and we love seeing you guys. And we'll see you on another video. Take care.